Hello everyone, this is Hero of Legend from GoingSony.com and welcome to this week's episode of the Weekly Recap, where I'll take a look at the biggest stories from May 21st to May 25th. Most of this week's big news all revolves around comments made by Sony, as well as their new interactive entertainment CEO, Codera. The first of which is comments made about PlayStation VR. They recently revealed that their headset's growth in the market is below expectations. Now, I believe this is the first time they have negatively commented on PlayStation VR and have stated that it is not performing as well as they had hoped, which unfortunately is proving a lot of people right regarding VR as not being the future of gaming, only being a fad, and whatnot. And it's important to note that Matt from Oculus VR also said something similar. Here's a quote. He says, "I'm not going to mince words. VR is still small. There's not as many headsets out there as we thought there might be a couple of years ago." Now, I think it's really, really important to point out that both Oculus and Sony, their comments about VR is not that the market is still small, but it's what they had expected. That would be completely different. Like, obviously, with the way things are now, with regarding price and whatnot, VR isn't going to, say, explode. But if they had anticipated that, if they had expected it and had gone into this new demographic knowing that, then that would be fine. But that's not what they're saying. Both of them are saying that they thought it would do better, which is honestly really, really bad. And I'm worried that it could potentially kill VR before it really has a good chance to start. And I've thought about it. I think the best route to go is lowering the price. I do not think that Sony's problem is that PlayStation VR isn't good enough. I personally have not tried it yet, but I know that a lot of people compare it to other VR headsets that aren't as good, or other VR headsets that are much better, with PlayStation VR not having as high of resolution and capabilities and whatnot. But I don't think they should focus on improving the hardware itself. I honestly think that they need to get this price down as much as possible. It already requires the purchase of a PlayStation 4, and a lot of people don't even know what they're missing out. Like, again, I haven't tried it, but I want to. But a lot of people don't think like that. So I think if you could get it down to like maybe even $200 or cheaper, even with the same kind of capabilities as we have now, then I think you're going to see a lot more people get it and love it and then grow the market that way. But at the end of the day, it's very interesting and I'm sure concerning to VR fans that two of the biggest players in this market now have stated that it is not doing as well as they had hoped. And it's going to be very, very interesting to see if Sony continues to push hard with VR or drops it completely like they did PlayStation Move. The next bit of news to come out of Codera's comments this week are a little fuzzy, and it's about the PlayStation 5. Now, he spoke to a lot of different outlets this week, and some of them reported that he said we should not expect a new PlayStation until 2021, which is 3 years away. And as soon as I heard that, I thought, BS. There is no way that Sony is going to release a new PlayStation in 2021. 3 years is way too long, and the PlayStation 4 is already starting to feel a little old right now. Now, some other outlets are now coming out and disputing that and saying he didn't say 3 years, and it seems like maybe they're thinking about just support for the PlayStation 4 being 3 years. But just because a company says they're going to support a system for a certain period of time does not mean that they won't release a new system in that same period of time. That's what they always do. When the PlayStation 4 came out, the PS3 still got big games for like a year or two after release. It's currently going on with Nintendo. The 3DS, annoyingly to me, is still getting good games that aren't coming to the Switch. So this isn't a surprise. This is how it's always done. So my guess is for PlayStation 5, we're going to see it in 2020. It could come out next year, but I kind of doubt that too. I'm pinning 2020. Now, moving on, he also said that in regards to their next console, they have to start thinking about it differently. They have to start thinking differently about console cycles and software and whatnot. Now, a lot of people seem to think that they're talking in terms of removing console upgrades entirely, and that we won't see generations anymore, but we'll simply see improvements, kind of like a PC, I guess. But I don't think that's what he meant. I think he just means in terms of backwards compatibility. You have a lot of games now, like Destiny and Final Fantasy XIV, and other games now that are going to be coming out, like Anthem, that revolve around a community. These are not games that you play and finish and then you never play them again. These are living games. And to break up the community like that would be very, very difficult. So I simply think that he's talking about the PlayStation 5 having the capability to play these games. I certainly hope that's what he's talking about, because I think backwards compatibility is more important now than it ever has been, and I hope that they realize the same thing. The final bit of news to come out of Codera this week is also the most mysterious, as it involves the PlayStation Vita. Very surprisingly, he says that Sony is considering various options regarding the PlayStation Vita, and that he almost seems to express an interest in the mobile market again, which is surprising because the previous CEO, Andrew House, talked as if mobile was dead to Sony. And honestly, that's how they've been acting ever since year 2 of the Vita, when they basically completely dropped support and refused to try beyond a base point. So I will say, I do not believe that they are going to try to do another handheld. And that's kind of what Codera seems to be saying, in that they have to start thinking about, you know, the PlayStation 4 being separate from a handheld, but maybe not being separate. And I don't know. The way that he's talking is really weird, and it doesn't make too much sense, and it could mean a million different things, but I don't know. I think they're looking at the Switch, and they're seeing the success of the Switch, and they're interested in it, but I think they also realize that there is no room for a dedicated handheld, if only because they don't have the resources to support 2 systems. So, but what will that mean? Will it mean that we get like a handheld PlayStation 4? I don't think that's going to happen, just because the way the PS4 was developed, I don't think you could take that and make it small enough, no matter how advanced the technology they have is. I think the thing that makes the most sense is some sort of streaming device, kind of like the PlayStation Vita with remote play. You know, a lot of people love remote play. I don't, but my only grievance with remote play is that the Vita doesn't really seem like to be a good fit for it. It doesn't have all of the buttons, so you have to do a bunch of weird touchscreen stuff, and the screen itself is too small. But if they made a device that was just for streaming, they could probably make it pretty cheap and have it be a little bit bigger and have all of the buttons, kind of like a Switch, and you would just have to be connected to the internet. Now, I don't think that would be as popular, because again, it would mean that you'd have to buy their new system and this new streaming device, as well as you would always have to be connected to the internet, and even then the quality is going to go up and down. So I don't know, it's really hard to imagine anything that they could do that would be a big hit. But I will say it is very, very interesting that he made these comments at all, because for the longest time now, Sony has pretended as if the Vita didn't even exist, and I, as well as a lot of other people, thought that mobile was just dead to them and would always be dead to them. Moving away from PlayStation-specific news, Battlefield 5 was officially announced this week. Now, this video is already longer than I want it to be, so I'm going to try to make this quick. The 2 most interesting things revealed about Battlefield 5 is that it seemingly will not have a season pass and will not have loot boxes of any kind. Now, my first reaction to this news is suspicion, because I have a really hard time believing them when they say this. I will say that we are at a point where gamers are more fed up with expensive season passes and loot boxes than ever before. And we are starting to see some developers back off of that, and they're receiving a lot of praise for it. So I could see some developers, using that as a way to drive sales, triumphantly saying, we're not going to have these bad practices in our games, and gamers go crazy for it, and they end up selling a lot more copies. But I have a hard time believing that EA is going to be the first big developer to do something like this. I really feel like there has to be some other way that they're going to be making more money. If they're not, then props to them. That would be an incredible move, and hopefully it would be a really big signal that the era of these horrible practices are over. Of course, the game would have to sell really well for that to happen, but that would, again, it would just be a really, really cool thing to see. But again, I'm very, very doubtful. We're going to have to wait and see, but I'm not that hopeful that there isn't anything in the game that won't be begging people for more money. And finally, this week's rumor review will look at the recent rumor that Sony is considering a PlayStation Classic. Now, little disclaimer right here at the beginning, as usual. This is a rumor that kind of seems to be more of a guess than anything else. I can't imagine that Sony isn't considering a PlayStation Classic, just because of the success that Nintendo has seen with their classic consoles. But regardless of whether the rumor is true or not, I don't see any reason why they shouldn't release a PlayStation Classic. I do think it would be a little bit harder to develop than the first couple of classic consoles that Nintendo has done, just because the Nintendo and Super Nintendo featured sprite visuals, and the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation both have 3D visuals, so it's a little harder to emulate. That might affect the price, which could affect the popularity of it. As well as PlayStation, I don't know if... I mean, a lot of the games that you would see featured on it, like Spyro and Crash, have been or are being remade, but I still think it would be a general success. Whether it's a huge, unbelievable success or not, I don't know, but I think it would do well enough to make it worth it for Sony. So I think we're going to see it, maybe not soon, but I'm sure we'll see it eventually. And that's all from me this week. Remember, E3 is only 18 days away. So start getting excited, start getting pumped. I know I'm going to be, and keep an eye out for big news that I'm going to be covering here in videos and maybe on the site. We'll see. But thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you next week.